manageable size group this morning. So if you want to turn on your video, please feel free to do so. If we do have any connectivity issues, I will go ahead and turn off video later on, but you're welcome to turn your video on if you'd like to this morning. Again, good morning. My name is Juanetta Ayers. I'm the Executive Director for Commonwealth North, and welcome to this August 6th meeting of our Food Security Study Group. We will be hearing from Jo Dawson with the Department of Education and Early Development. But before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to Terry Smith, who is our co-chair of the study group and our board president for Commonwealth North. So Terry, the floor is yours.
Oh, very good. Just a quick one. Just want to say thank you for joining us this morning. We are about 3 to 4 weeks before we start our writing process. And so we are putting the fine touches on our speakers. So if you have any other ideas that you'd like to see on the topic of food security to help us in our crafting phase, we'd appreciate your thoughts. Every one of these has been informative and has brought a new light to this topic and given us some great ideas for high-level public policy issues relative to food security for all Alaskans. So we are excited about our speaker today and bringing some insight into food security as it relates to our youngest ones and how to ideally better serve them in the future so we can bring food security to all and with a common definition. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jo. We're excited to have you this morning. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. Let me figure the share your screen out really quick. And did that work?
Yeah, great.
Okay, I've got 3 monitors today, and so things are a little all over the place for me. Okay, so thank you again for inviting me to speak. I'm the program manager for child nutrition. We're housed at the Department of Education and Early Development. We're a team of 10 people working the array of programs. Today I did a particular focus on the food distribution part of our programs, but we're going to touch a little bit on all of them. It's a fairly short presentation so that I have time for questions because there's just so much going on with these programs. So this is our mission statement. We work, our primary audience is school districts, and we'll kind of get to that in a moment. But we work with a number of different types of organizations across Alaska, very far-reaching, and we want to help to make sure that children across our state have quality nutrition programs and making sure that families are well-nourished. And I try to take every presentation back to Maslow's theory of hierarchy, that we want to make sure that our children are fed well, so they're ready to go to school, to get their education, to be successful Alaskans, and that's really the heart of it. This is kind of a summary of the array of programs we have. The nutrition programs, which is school meals, that's National School Lunch, School Breakfast. The Child and Adult Care Food Program, which works in child care centers, Head Start agencies, after school programs. We have summer food programming, which is sometimes schools, sometimes child cares, but we have a lot of nonprofit relationships too, who have feeding programs in the summer, sometimes with activities, sometimes they partner with other organizations that have activities, and the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable program, which is geared at schools, and that one's a grant program. And then we've got the USDA foods, which we will talk a lot about today. We've got our commodity foods for schools and the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TEFAP. And then we work with a lot of different initiatives and grants, such as school wellness policies, farm to school initiatives, and the CDC Health and Wellness. Excuse me. Just to kind of get an idea of the money we receive and where it's going. We receive about $68 million in federal funding, and the lion's share does go out in school meals. This is a typical year. meaning I made this last year. I have no idea what it's going to look like for this past year because everything was so different with COVID. So so again, we're looking at the lion's share being the school meal programs and our childcare programs running in second there. Our funding is 99.999% federal. There is a state general fund match. It's pretty minimal. It's about just under $45,000. And as well, districts are expected to have a maintenance of effort towards the program as well. But the funding comes from the feds through Department of Education right back out to the local operators. We receive a separate administrative budget. So all the money that program sponsors, districts, or childcares earn, they receive. We don't take anything off the top. We want to make sure that they're getting every dime of federal money that they can. Our USDA food programs follows a similar path. Those food programs purchase food from American agriculture and provide state agencies with a list of food that we can bring up. So we receive an entitlement to make those purchases, which is based on some poverty factors, the number of unemployed persons in the state and the number of persons in poverty. And so every state receives a fair share on that for the Emergency Food Assistance Program. And that one is the TEFAP is what provides commodity foods to the food banks, food pantries, and emergency shelters. We also receive the USDA foods, like I said, for schools, and that's based on how many children participate in school meal programs. So, so the purchases are made, we order based on our allocation, and again, we ship that out directly to schools or food banks, whichever the case may be. So TEFAP, we have about 71 food banks, food pantries, and emergency shelters across the state who participate in the TEFAP program. For the food pantries, we really rely on our partnerships with the Food Bank of Alaska, the Fairbanks Food Bank, Kenai Food Bank, and I think the Wasilla Food Bank to work with the smaller pantries. So we work with one larger, and then they work with the smaller pantries. We help with transportation somewhat, and we actually being USDA, we've got certain locations where transportation is paid for, others USDA doesn't pay for directly, but we receive a small financial allocation. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And we try to, again, pass through that. We probably pass through at least 90% to the food banks to help with their transportation and storage costs. We keep a little bit of administrative money to be able to staff it. But otherwise, it all goes right out to the food bank programs. Whoops, I want to go back a slide there. I wrote down this past year we were allocated $842,000. That's a fairly normal year, a little high, but we wound up with a lot of extra allocation this year, in much part because of the environment we're in right now. So that was like our base funding, but again, we don't receive that in money. We receive that in entitlement, so things that we can purchase on the behalf of the food banks. We don't actually see the money, we just see the credit.
It's like chits.
Yeah, or one of my staffers calls it monopoly money. So,
there you go.
So this is kind of just an array of where our pantries, our TEFAP programs are across the state. So there's some empty space, but we really have, I think, some pretty good coverage. So we've had a lot of changes to our program this past year. We were approved for disaster household feeding. I think we were the second state to be approved for that. We were only approved for 2 months, but this allowed for our food banks, food pantries to be able to distribute food without application to families in need. And it really sped up that process and was able to meet immediate needs today without having barriers. We couldn't get approved for a third month, but what we did is we were able to increase the threshold for eligibility through the end of the federal fiscal year. And we actually have just turned in our state plan to try to get that approved for next year as well. So, so we are trying to support the programs to help the residents of Alaska. I was reading in today's news, there was an article about the Kenai Food Bank and just, you know, what they are going through. There's a lot of demand right now for food bank commodities. Trade mitigation has been around, I want to say, about 2 years now. Trade mitigation came about due to trade practices that American agriculture was having a very difficult time exporting food due to tariffs. So trade mitigation, it was a federal initiative to purchase more American agriculture and get it out to the food banks since it wasn't being exported internationally. And we've been a big winner. Remember, I told you we received about 800,000 in regular entitlement. Well, we've got another 4 million in trade mitigation. That's a lot of food. So fortunately, we've also been able to receive some administrative funds because you get the food, but you still have to be able to, the Food Bank of Alaska still has to ship it out to the rural communities. And shipping in Alaska costs a lot of money. Transportation is insane. So we've gotten some administrative funds, but as you can see, 122,000 is not a lot compared to $4 million worth of food. We're happy to have it. We would like more. We also, the Family First Coronavirus Act brought us another $1 million in commodity food for the food banks. So again, but that was commodities, so we keep bringing food in and it gets costly to get that out to the rural communities. Like I said, USDA helps us somewhat. We've got 13 communities in Alaska that transportation is for free with USDA, and they are larger communities, as you might imagine: Fairbanks and Anchorage, Bethel, Juneau, Ketchikan. But when you're not in one of those communities, you're going to have to, these organizations may have to pay for it. The food bank does a really great job at trying to reach those communities, but it costs a lot. I think the Kenai and Fairbanks food banks don't have the same issue with transportation because their areas are closer. They're more within trucking distance than the Food Bank of Alaska's. And then the CARES Act brought us more money, almost another $800,000 in commodities. This time we did get administrative funds, and again, those were all completely passed through to our partner agencies to help them with these expenses in transporting, storage, staffing, and being able to work through those the foods that they'd received. So I'm going to kind of toggle to the other food distribution program, which is the commodity foods in school. It's similar in a program. We don't receive these extra initiatives through the coronavirus bills, but the commodity foods for our districts is about 15 to 20% of the groceries that they have in their inventory. So it's very impactful to them that this program be maintained. Again, there's the whole transportation issue that a district can get free food, but it costs them a lot to get that free food. We really rely on, in both programs, on bypass mail being a strong option for us, and really fully take advantage of that as best we can. I'm going to talk about the feeding programs and kind of focus on schools again, since that's the largest. The National School Lunch Program and the array of programs that we offer in schools is pretty significant. And we see a lot of hunger in Alaska. We see a lot of poverty in Alaska. You know, about 80% of our schools are outside the road system that goes, from Kenai up to Fairbanks. And a lot of those schools are fairly high poverty. So, we're really grateful for the support, the participation we have in rural Alaska. All meals served at school are reimbursed, and that's something that not a lot of people know. In fact, a lot of these programs are fairly secret. A lot of people don't know anything about them, but every meal is reimbursed. We always look at the eligibility status of the child. Financially, kind of determines how much the school gets reimbursed, but every meal is subject to reimbursement. And again, that's money that we pass through here at the Department of Education. We really are fortunate in Alaska that we're able to have a lot of non-pricing programs. There's provisions that allow schools to serve all meals for free if they are a low-income school, so they don't even have to take applications. We've got a really great partnership with several different state agencies, such as Public Assistance and the Office of Children's Services, and we're able to get data like children who are on SNAP food stamps, TANF, foster children, children who are on the migrant program, and food distribution program and Indian reservations. We're able to take all of that data and match it to student records so that families don't have to reapply for benefits. They've already worked through one system and not to have them work through another. And so when districts are able to certify that their school is a low-income school, they're able to serve all meals at the free rate, not charge any child any meal. And there's so many benefits to that because we see overall all participation increase in these universal feeding programs because we've taken barriers away. We've also taken stigma away. So when kids are seeing many other children participate, they feel like it's not a low income program, it's just a free meal. And again, I'm going to go right back to Maslow's theory of hierarchy. If our kids are eating healthy meals, they're more prepared for their day. They're more prepared for their education. And that makes me happy. This is our free and reduced price report. This is an annual report we do. It's, I think it's really interesting. I used to use it actually before I even worked at Department of Education because it's a annual survey of low income status across the state that's completed every year by school site and then rolled up by district. The one on the screen is a few years old. This past year we were at 51%, excuse me, free and reduced price. So as you can see, this is about an 18-year graph that we've got going. And so it just continues to climb and climb. We're going to expect this next year that we're going to see more climbing, just kind of based on what's happening in our state. I'm sorry, I have a little tickle and I need to drink some more water.
Yeah.
Okay. So approximately 48,000 meals are served at schools every day. And 75% of those are to low-income children. And breakfast, more than half those children also have breakfast, 94% of those to low-income children. So that's really substantial. We'd love to see our breakfast programs grow more. They've increased by about 40% in the last 5 years. So we are seeing more uptake on that, which makes me really happy, but I'd like to see it grow even more. So talk a little bit about COVID response. I think it was hard to not see the outpouring across the state of school nutrition really supporting their communities. Schools were closed, but these amazing people were still at work, providing food to kids in the closure. It was really, to me, just probably the most inspirational point in my career, just seeing everything that was happening out there to help the children. We were really lucky. We got very ahead of the curve on this, and I'd like to say it's just luck, but we just kind of based on what was happening nationally, we had turned in waivers to prepare us for school closure well before the closure happened. I think we were the second state to get a non-congregate feeding waiver. And what that means is our programs require that kids are at school and they eat. We've never been in a meals to go environment. That's not what the regulations allow. So for us to be able to have these waivers in place really let us work with districts before schools were closed by Governor Dunleavy. And not that there wasn't some manic time, but we were able to start in advance. And we were able to get a lot of waivers. Some of them were state requested, some of them were national waivers, but to really find the flexibility that schools needed to be able to, excuse me, to be able to serve children. Most of these waivers have been extended into the fall, except for area eligibility. And what that means is in the spring, all kids were served meals for free. Didn't matter where they lived, didn't matter the individual income status of the child. That has changed right now, at least, for the fall. So for the fall, it is really based on the individual child's eligibility. So it's not free meals for all, it's free meals for children who are eligible for free meals, paid meals for children who are eligible for paid meals. So it is very different. And we'll see if USDA makes those changes on that. But that's the environment as school is beginning that we will be working within. So we had 95% of our districts continue on in March and April and May, which I thought was really amazing. And we did see a drop in the meals served by about 30%. And I think a lot of that is, you know, we had more low income students participate than above income. I think that really accounts for that big drop there. We also, I have to say, I just have sometimes that luck of being in the right place at the right time. I see Cara Durr is on here. Last year, we started working on a project with talking to folks at Baylor University with the Texas Hunger Initiative on their Meals to You program, and we thought it was so great. It sends prepackaged meals out to families. They were working on it in Texas for a week at a time, a box of breakfast and lunch and snack to each eligible child once a week. I'm like, that is really great. And we really wanted to replicate it, and we wanted to see how it went. And in, I want to say December of last year, USDA had told us that if we wanted, we could just work with them instead of creating our own project. And so we started working towards that. Well, we're going to do Meals for You. We're going to partner with them. It's going to be great. And then COVID happened, and the Baylor University was approved for emergency Meals to You, and we'd already been working towards it. So we were able to get several districts. Well, we got 5 districts on. We had more that were interested, but there was a follow through. But we did get a few districts on the emergency program. And what's really interesting, they were able to serve during the unanticipated school closure, but it also extended twice into June 30 and then August 15. So that program, although it's not called summer, has been able to serve children in those districts right up until next week sometime. So again, just the right place at the right time, just, I don't know, dumb luck. So really glad, because some of the rural districts don't have the infrastructure for meals to go. They couldn't get the supplies they needed. It's a very different program than serving congregate food on a plate or a tray, than being able to have packaged meals if you don't have all of the tools that you need. So it was really great to be able to support families in those communities. We also have, I want to call it regular disaster feeding, because I think we're not calling COVID disaster feeding anymore. We've got a couple of different types of disaster feeding that we're able to do. The example, the first one with commodity foods is that we're able to send the commodities we receive, the school commodities, in the case of a disaster feeding. The most recent examples of that would be like the flooding in Eagle. So we are able to send food to those communities. They're doing congregate feeding. It's for the community members. It's for the rescue workers or the emergency service workers. And so that's one disaster feeding with the commodities. The second type would be after the November 18 earthquake, when Anchorage and Matsu had to close down their schools, that we were able to have, again, unanticipated school closure. We got some waivers in place so that, again, those two districts were able to serve meals to go, to be able to get reimbursement for the meals that they were giving, even though it wasn't meeting, the normal USDA protocol. And that one, I think, really was impactful to me, because in Matsu, they went through their low income school bus routes to deliver these meals. They ran into children who had not seen their parents since the earthquake had hit. So they were almost first responders and able to let OCS know, that there were children that were unparented and hadn't had any contact, and as well as serving, healthy meals to these families. So it was, I thought, really wonderful to be able to see them right there. That is my quick presentation. Went a little quicker than I thought. Do you all have any questions for me on the programs?
Yes. Everybody, I'm going to go ahead and stop your slide share, Jo. And again, we can, again, we've got a manageable size group this morning. So if you want to turn on your videos, and you can use the raise your hand feature in the participants window to raise your hand to be called on, or wave on the video. But thanks, Jo, for that presentation. And I'm going to turn to Terry and Ed for any first questions.
Very good. Jo, first, thank you so much. Great insight into your world and how you're touching all the lessons across this, very fractured delivery and transportation chain. Tell me, there's one more general question. Are there any specific large public policies that you've come across that are barriers to helping you in your work, or impairing your work, or anything that you've come across that you thought of as, or have heard of as, best practices in other states that we might be able to bring forward in our work?
Well, because Alaska is very local control, you run into a lot of local decision making on where to go with some of these. Like I said, I would love to see the school breakfast numbers increase. Some states have requirements that school breakfast be provided. That's not, we don't actually have any state statutes or regulations on our programs. We follow strictly the federal statutes and regulations and policy. So, we would love to see encouragement. I think that they, like I said, breakfast is a really integral thing. Farm to school, I think that's something that's been just looking at our local, trying to have our local food security stronger. It's been something, the state funding dropped on that. It's housed, or was housed, at DNR, Department of Natural Resources, Division of Ag. There is no funding now at the state, and at the federal level, it's grant funding. So maybe you can get it, maybe you can't. And that was, I think, a really successful program. as well as there used to be a grant at Commerce called the Nutritional Food for Alaska Schools grant. And that was under Parnell, and that provided districts with funding to make local purchasing, and again, help support the local growers, as well as the seafood industry, or, you know, the whole array of local food. So, you know, we've had some really great stuff in our state, but it doesn't always stick.
Very good. And then a second question, I'll turn it over to Ed next. Relative to the supply chain that you work with or infrastructure, what are the largest barriers that you have seen that choke up your work? Is there that's reasonable, that might be that the industry might be able to help with?
I would say bypass mail, just because so frequently it comes under scrutiny and has to be validated so often. It's really very imperative for rural Alaska to be able to afford these programs is to be able to afford to get food. And without bypass mail, they just wouldn't. And that would be, it would be tragic for those communities.
Very good. Ed?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Hey, I really apologize for dropping in late, kind of an unexpected crazy morning at my household today. So, and I probably missed probably a good part of your presentation, Joe, and I'll get back online when we have that presentation available and take another look at it. But my wife just finished a long career as a school nurse, both in elementary, middle, and high school. So I'm pretty aware of, you know, she's always drummed into me how important nutrition is to learning. So that's, you have a good awareness of that. But I guess I just ask, you know, I know that I did work for the Department of Natural Resources and the Division of Agriculture once upon a time. And I know that there was an effort for schools to start growing their own food. You know, it was both an effort to provide more food for this students and also to educate them on agriculture and how to grow food. I don't know if that's something that your group's been involved in, or have you seen that at all in the state? Is that something that is worth pursuing in your opinion?
It is, actually, and we just received a USDA Farm to School grant. It's something that we normally would partner with ag on. I don't know. There's been some transition with the people we used to partner with, so I'm not sure if we are. But yeah, we've been supporting farm to school efforts and farm to early childhood efforts for quite a long time, and have enjoyed that partnership with ag. We do see it, you know, on many levels, healthy food, but again, you know, teaching children about their food, where it's coming from. So yeah, it still exists. It's the funding that kind of comes and goes at the state and federal levels, and that's kind of frustrating. It's never been made a permanent priority. I always say, you know, I say it at my house, where you put your money says what your priorities are. And I feel like everyone thinks it's important, but until we have permanent funding for it, how important is it? And that's the problem, is grants come and go. I'd like to see something, you know, be able to make this permanent.
Yeah, and I've seen sometimes it just takes creative people at the schools, right? I think, as I remember, Toke, they installed a wood chip boiler plant to reduce heating and electricity costs in the school, and they were able to use the waste heat from that boiler plant. I know that they were trying to use that to help grow lettuce and vegetables. So I thought that was a very interesting concept. So.
Yeah, Alaska Gateway has a really great greenhouse program. Southeast Island does. We've got a lot of small local school-by-school gardens that are a little less well-known. So it's always great, but you do need those champions at the local level as well as at the state or federal level, you know, to be able to partner and encourage and troubleshoot and resource find.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of potential to that, and if there's some way to push, you know, school districts to amp that up, I think that would be in Alaska's benefit. But thank you very much.
Yeah, we actually just, we have a contract with the Farm to School Network right now to take a look at the sub-grants that we've done, as well as the Farm to School program over at Ag, and try to assess like those factors that made sustainable programs, so that when grant funds go away, we know what kind of sticks and what doesn't, and also to help us when we're looking for grants to know what we should be aiming for as well. So because we've been throwing, you know, a lot of money at this for a decade now, and we just really want to assess what components make for long-term measurable success.
Yes, thank you.
Bernie has a question.
Yes, Joe. I was in Fairview last week, and right across the street from the Fairview Rec Center, and there were a group of people, a couple of people handing out boxes of food, lunch food for children. Was that part of your group, or is that something that the Fairview Rec Center is doing on their own?
I imagine it's part of my group. We have the summer food program. Children's Lunchbox is our biggest summer program operator in Anchorage, and it sounds exactly like the sort of thing they would do. So I bet that was them. We have Anchorage and Mat-Su area are pretty well covered with some sponsors like that who work with other organizations, and the other organization has an activity or something, they've got the location, and the sponsor will bring them food that's already been prepared. So yeah, it sounds like one of ours. So they're getting financial reimbursement, they do the meal count, they submit that to us, and we reimburse them for the meals served.
Okay. Just a reminder to the other participants, you can use the chat feature to submit a question, and I'll relay that to Joe if you'd rather do it that way. So you can submit questions via chat. Joe, I have a question for you. You know, just thinking systemically, it's interesting that we've heard from other emergency feeding programs, and now yourself this morning talking about the fact that with the COVID and some of the relief funding, that a substantial quantity of food commodities have been available, more so maybe than in normal operating circumstances. But, you know, that creates a lot of operational problems for you in terms of storage and transportation. And so I'm wondering, again, from the policy level, obviously it sounds like to really be prepared for these circumstances, you need to have the infrastructure in place to handle increased storage and increased transportation needs. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we definitely, when trade mitigation started, so well before COVID relief, we were realizing that the distribution model that most of our food banks and food pantries were using was creating a storage nightmare. And they just had too much food, which, what a blessing. But the food's not there to be stored. The food is there to be with families. So we really started kind of campaigning to adjust their distribution guidelines because they were meant for, you know, our normal leaner times when we only get, you know, the $800,000 a year, and then we kind of try to stretch that over the whole year and stretch it across Alaska. When we've got a plethora of food coming, and we know we've got more coming, we worked with them to encourage them to like double or triple their distribution to families. And to really assess it, if they're getting more families, maybe they need to back off a little bit. Our requirement is that the distribution be fair and equitable, so that each family is getting, you know, a like kind. It's a family of 4, it's a family of 8, but to be able to look at that, and we don't want to see it in inventory. We want to see it getting out to the families. So that was part of it. Doesn't solve the transportation issue, but it helped resolve the storage issue, because they're just, everyone was complaining about not having the room. But again, we didn't want them to have the room. We wanted the food out to families. So it was a concept change, because we were used to kind of trying to hold it on so that we had commodities next month and the next month too, so that we could be doing you know, a continual distribution without a disruption, but with so much coming, it just needed to go.
You know, that really kind of points out another sort of systemic issue that I just wanted to touch on, and then I'll toss it to Terry. So can you speak to the proportion of food that you're handling that's perishable versus shelf-stable foods?
We really, well, we stay away from almost anything refrigerated or produce. Just getting it to Alaska is one issue, getting it to rural Alaska is another. So the commodities that we purchase are generally either canned, dry, or frozen. So we do bring in, you know, frozen chicken, a lot of frozen chicken, frozen pork, frozen berries, but we really try to go more towards the shelf stable because although the food banks can handle the freezer, not all of the food pantries can. So we want to make sure that we're getting food that can reach all of Alaska. And as, you know, a lifelong Alaskan who's lived all over our state, you know, I have a perspective that I don't want urban feeding programs. I want feeding programs that are going to serve all of our residents. And so we do gear more towards, you know, canned peaches over, you know, a truck of apples, because we do bring it up by the truckload and then kind of distribute it across the state. So yeah, not a lot of fresh, or other than the frozen foods.
Thanks. Terry, did you have a question?
No, actually, you started at that was my my question on this food. It's your food to you or food meals to you program that you kicked off this last year. How much of that was shelf stable, or was it all shelf stable that you were able to repackage, or was it packaged elsewhere and then delivered in that prepackaged state? Or
it was completely shelf stable, so including UHT milk. And you know, I am a big proponent of fresh food, fresh produce, all of that. But we were targeting communities that wouldn't otherwise have nutrition programs. So these were procured by the Texas Hunger Initiative and with vendors who provide, you know, prepackaged 5-component meals that were shelf stable. So fresh would be better, but wouldn't probably need it where it needed to go. So yeah.
Food is best, fresh would be better, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So the how long? What's the average, or what is the requirement for shelf stable and relative to time? How long can those keep?
Generally 6 months. Because that was a concern. You saw the list of schools, so we were going to a lot of very small communities with those, and needed to make sure that they would be able to stand the duration as well. You know, they were going a week at a time, so there was, I think the mail service got a lot of business this summer from us.
Can you say a little bit, Jo, about the distribution system from the USDA? I'm assuming that they have some centralized distribution, because you're talking about trucking, or I don't know if you're marine shipping or what. Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure. So like I said, we receive our entitlement, and there's like a catalog, like an online catalog that we can choose, you know, what foods, what period of time. There's, you know, windows of opportunity. After all of the states make their selection, then USDA goes out to bid for the products. And when they're awarded, you know, again to American agriculture market, ours is trucked to Washington, and we take possession for it there, because getting it to Washington is the cost of the grower, the distributor, and no one will ship to Alaska. So we take possession of it in Seattle. We have 2 different freight forwarders that we work with. We do annual bids with them, and we then distribute across the state. So we don't have a warehouse. Other state agencies down south have a warehouse. We've looked into it and it would increase our costs so much. We even looked at warehousing in Washington, but the state of Alaska doesn't really like you leasing property out of the state. So we were shut down really quick on that. And so we get, again, distribute from Washington. So we've got, one barge going to Southeast Alaska and the other one going to Anchorage, where it's, again, further distributed according to the district or the TEFAP agency. The food bank will take quite a lot because they oversee about 50, I could be wrong on that, but they oversee about 50 of our smaller programs. The ones that we can ship to for free, we do, and the others they take possession of at their warehouse, and they keep it until they hit their threshold for bypass mail to go to those communities.
A quick question for you, Jo. There's a Senator Murkowski reintroduced a Food Supply Protection Act. Are you familiar with that? I just saw it came out, I think, yesterday, and I was just any thoughts about what that might mean to Alaska?
I have not seen it. I apologize.
Yeah, look pretty good. I would take a look at it. Look like it would be really good for the states. Juanetta, do we have any questions online?
All right. So again, no, we don't have anybody. Not a very vocal crowd this morning. But I was wondering also, Jo, with some of the smaller programs, then that you're working with the larger food banks, and then they're going out to the food pantries and some of the smaller food programs. Are you seeing any structural problems there in terms of either transportation or storage, or because I think any food management program is, there's likely to be some food wastage, and so how do you manage for that, and how do you work with the recipient programs to make sure that those things are working well?
So one thing we do, USDA has a really, they have a pretty significant monitoring requirement. So we review about 10% of the food bank's sites, well, all of them, every year. So we're in a travel freeze right now, but normally, we're getting out there into rural Alaska. We're going to schools in rural Alaska anyway. So wherever there's a TEFAP, we go see that, and we try to look for those issues. One of the biggest ones was I mentioned earlier, freezers. A lot of the smaller food pantries might not have freezers. The Food Bank of Alaska, I think, has been really awesome about trying to secure grants to help with the infrastructure in some of those smaller areas. As far as food waste, it does happen. You're right. You cannot have any food program, much less a food distribution program, without some waste. We're able to, if it's on the part of the shipper, we're able to file claims against them and get financial compensation for that, and then we would distribute it further. So if it was going to Anchorage, they would receive those monies and be able to make their own purchase with that from the shipping company. If it's a storage issue, then we don't have that same possibility, but we want to take a look at what the issue is and try to resolve it. But we try to get out in the field a lot so that we have an idea and can provide technical assistance when we're there if we see things that can be corrected on site.
Hey, Jo, this is Terry.
Thank you. And Eve Van Donnellan. Go ahead, Eve.
Yeah, hi. And sorry, Jo, when I sign on, it's saying that it's Kara every time. So you probably saw me pop on, and I always have to change my name. I don't know what happened there. I just wanted to touch a little bit on that the transportation, but also the storage questions that Joe has been answering, particularly in those small communities. And just, you know, I manage the Alaska Food Coalition, which includes many of those small communities, and we've definitely seen an uptick in TEFAP sites becoming part of the coalition. And that is consistent. The cold storage is consistently something that we're hearing from a lot of the smaller sites, even before the current crisis. So I manage a mini grant cycle every year, and it's meant for building capacity in smaller communities to be able to receive and distribute food, but it can't be specifically for food. And looking back over, you know, the last several years of those grants, the majority are for freezers and cold storage. It's a huge capacity issue, even just over the past couple of months. I mean, it sounds like I haven't seen the article about Kenai Peninsula Food Bank, but I know I've spoken with Greg Meyer, the executive director down there, about the struggles they're having with cold storage. I've spoken with the Toke TEFAP site at Helping Hands Food Pantry, and they had to purchase multiple freezers over the past couple months to be able to receive all these amazing commodity foods that have been coming through. But that is, I mean, when we look at small communities, that is a huge capacity issue there. And then, you know, from food bank's perspective, that transportation piece is just, you know, it's a struggle. And I think Joe's really touched on that and really covered that really well. But, you know, we get food out to communities however we can, but bypass mail is our number one. It's the most important thing for getting food out there, because it drops our cost of shipping food down from $1.50 to 50 cents a pound, which is still really high. But, you know, it's something, and to lose that would be really, really problematic. And then for other communities, I mean, we get food there however we can. There are communities that we've delivered food by hovercraft. It's, you know, it's a very creative process. And then I just wanted to touch on that act that that Terry mentioned, that Murkowski just announced, and we had a chance to look over that, and it's true, that has a lot of great capacity pieces. So we're hopeful that some of that will be able to help us continue to distribute TEFAP and other commodity foods and just bolster the program. So yeah, but thank you, Joe. You do such a good job, and such a good job of explaining all these complexities.
Thanks.
Eve and Joe, you know, to that end, have you noticed any disruptions or challenges, particularly with, you know, seeing carriers like Raven not be in operations during this recent time period? Also over the winter, the stoppage of the ferry system. Are any of those things impacting your distribution networks?
Yeah, for us, both of those really impacted. And with Raven, you know, right at the time that communities were trying to shut down as well due to the pandemic, we had communities that, you know, were really in dire straits for food. Here in Southeast Alaska with the ferry system, we had 2 districts that were unable. Because the barges didn't go there either, and so the ferry system was how they got their food. I think both of those were resolved, but we'll find out in October, you know, what happens with the ferry schedule. I don't even know that if it's published yet, because barges still don't go there. And you know, we don't have bypass mail in Southeast Alaska. It's only in the rest of Alaska. And so it really leaves them without a resource to not just the schools or the food pantries, but the grocery stores were running out of food. So it was a very difficult situation for particularly Chatham and Hoonah. Those were the 2 most affected by it. All of them were affected. They were the most affected though.
And Terry, did you have another question?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's gone. I'll have a follow-up after. Thank you.
All right. Well, we are coming up on 9 o'clock. So I'm going to just do a last call if there's any other participants online that want to ask a question. Okay, a very docile group this morning, Joe. They're letting you off easy. All right, well, let me just turn to next week before we say a final thanks to Joe. Next week, we do have Bob Ripley with Costco and Eddie Walton with Matson, who will be our speakers, speaking from a perspective of large retailers and shippers and what their perspectives are for food security since the pandemic. So that's next week, August 13 at 8 a.m. So again, encourage you to sign up for that session. I've included the link in the chat. And so I see Veronica's turned on her video, so I'm wondering if she has a question.
Just a thank you. I just wanted you to know that we are listening and very informative, and yeah, it's early and I'm taking it all in. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Sue. Okay, all right, and Terry, Ed, any last comments?
Just wanted to say thank you for everybody that joined us this morning and your thoughts and ideas. And Joe, I really appreciate you sharing your information. Also want to invite you to stay engaged. We need you at the table and your experience across Alaska to help with the insight and the nuance of trying to prepare public policy, because this is that kind of guiding instrument that we're trying to bring forward and to give continuity to the discussion, not only now, but for the future as we deliver our recommendations to the legislature and the governor. So with that, thank you. And Ed, anything from you before we adjourn?
Oh, I just, again, thank you, Joe, and everyone for participating. Again, once again, I just sort of tickled my brain that bypass mail is important, and that statistic about 50 cents versus $1.50. I think bypass mail is a critical piece of Alaska's food security, and we need to keep that in mind. But thank you, Joe.
And we do have another question. Garden, do you want to go ahead and?
Hi, good morning. Actually, my name is Stephen Hawley, and sorry, it's Gardening Gathers on our Zoom because we're doing a campaign to get folks in rural Alaska to see the value of gardening. And so, I mean, a lot of the theories behind the results from the Victory Gardens and how much folks were able to grow locally. I mean, 40% of their fresh vegetables is something substantial that could really be a part of the rural economy. And so, looking for a lower hanging wind. I'm sorry I didn't ask when she was talking earlier, because it just the question just hit me. I mean, what would it take to be able to talk with the USDA procurement contractors with an interest from local schools to be able to get locally grown food bought by the federal government and then sold through the school system?
There is a procurement process with USDA, so you have to be registered as a vendor to be able to be on the bids. Because remember, I told you that we pick from a catalog, and once all the states do that, then USDA puts out bids for those products. So that's kind of the first step there, to be able to sell to like the USDA programs.
Okay.
Separate from that, though, schools on their local procurement are permitted to purchase locally. So outside of USDA, they have to follow USDA procurement rules, which are not that much different than state of Alaska. You know, on small purchases and bids, they're allowed to have a geographic preference determined as they're going into it. So all of those are allowable, but to go to actually have the feds buy it, then the grower would have to be, or distributor, a federal vendor. Okay, and to do it straight with the school, is that allowed for school lunches or just for snacks, or? It's all allowed. I mean, there's a lot of local purchasing happening. Anchorage and Matsu, they get, carrots from the valley. We have a lot of schools with very strong and successful fish to school programs who are procuring local fish from their processors. Alaska Gateway. I think that they're getting cabbage and the barley. So we've been promoting it. It's still always that local decision on what to do, how to do it, but it definitely happens. And so for sure, if you know people who have crop who are interested, they can outreach directly to the districts.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Joe, if I can just add in closing, if I can just add also, both, larger distributors like Charlie's and Cisco that work with those types of products, they have their specs that are required in order to participate to meet the USDA requirements on their websites for local growers. I think those are available, at least Cisco's were a couple of years ago on their website for the vendor programs. So that's another resource because it's typically not just a, hey, yeah, if you grow it, they will come kind of a situation, and it's got to meet a certain spec. So for cleanliness and otherwise. So just that little tidbit for you as you guys are looking to bring local produce into the market. And so with that, we will see everyone. Is it next week now? What, Juanetta?
Next week?
Very good.
Yes.
Have a great week and take care. We'll see you next week. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Joe. Appreciate your time.